He was a murderer, a gambler, a fugitive, and a genuinely brilliant economist. He convinced the French crown to let him redesign their entire financial system. And for about 2 years, it worked. That is what makes this story uncomfortable. Not that a foolish idea failed, but that a brilliant idea worked long enough for people to stop questioning it. Before the collapse, before the panic, before the crowds screaming outside his window, France believed him, and that belief was the machine. Jean-Baptiste was a notary. He understood documents the way other men understood roads, not because he loved them, but because they were the surface his life moved across. He understood debt, interest, and the silence that falls over a household when the numbers stop adding up. He watched the room that morning the way a man watches a table where everyone else is winning. Not jealously, more carefully than that. He was asking himself a question he could not quite form into words yet. Is this real, or is this the most convincing thing I have ever seen? The thing that bothers me about John Law is that when you read the idea before the disaster, it makes sense. John Law had spent his life close enough to banking, gambling, prison, and exile to understand one thing most polite officials did not. Money was never only metal. It was trust, moving from one hand to another. And here's what he concluded. France was not bankrupt because it lacked gold. France was bankrupt because it did not know how to use the wealth it had. That is not the reasoning of a fraudster. That is the reasoning of a man who had seen something others had not yet seen. And precisely that is where the danger begins. Here is the idea Law brought to France. France did not need more gold, Law argued. It needed a machine of trust, a bank, paper notes, a system people could believe in long enough for the country to breathe again. And at first, it worked. Jean-Baptiste heard those numbers read aloud in the coffee house. He wrote them down, checked them again, and found no obvious error. That was the first moment he truly began to worry, because the system did not look insane. It looked functional. For the first time in years, France felt like it was moving again. The man who had been a murderer, a gambler, and a fugitive was now, effectively, running the French economy. And here is the terrible thing about that sentence. It does not sound like a warning yet. Then came the oldest financial drug in history. A real asset, wrapped in an unlimited story. Law connected his bank to a trading company, the Compagnie d'Occident, known later as the Mississippi Company, which held the rights to develop France's Louisiana territories. What Law did with that vastness was turn it into a projection. The Mississippi Basin held, he argued, extraordinary wealth, a new world waiting to be unlocked. The company issued shares. The shares began to rise. Then they rose faster. Then they rose in a way that stopped looking like investment and started looking like gravity. By 1719, shares had increased in value by something close to 20 times their original price. Men who had entered the Rue Quincampoix with modest savings left having, on paper, become wealthy. The street itself had become a machine for turning belief into price. And this is where the easy version of the story becomes useless. Because if Law had been completely wrong, France would have rejected him. The terrifying part is that he was useful first. I'll be honest. When I first read about John Law's system, not the collapse, not the panic, just the theory, I found it coherent. And that bothered me, because the feeling of understanding something completely can feel almost identical to being right. The dangerous ones arrive well-dressed. They come with people you respect already nodding. They have just enough truth inside them to make doubt feel unsophisticated. That was the room John Law built, in complete good faith, and that is why it was more dangerous than anything he could have built out of lies. Jean-Baptiste did not want to be rich. Not exactly. He wanted to stop feeling like the only adult in a room full of rewarded children. He had watched his brother-in-law, a man who could not read a contract without moving his lips, buy a second property before 35. At dinner that autumn, the man did not boast. That was worse. He simply spoke with the calmness of someone life had agreed with. Jean-Baptiste passed the bread, smiled, said nothing. But something in him tightened. That was the insult. Not that reckless men were winning, that the world had started calling their recklessness insight. That is the wound a system like this knows how to touch, not greed. The exhaustion of always being careful in a world that keeps rewarding people who weren't. A bubble does not burst when people become irrational. It bursts when rational people all try to leave through the same door. But before that, there is always a moment when the man who built it stops persuading and starts commanding. That moment, for John Law, came in early 1720. The shares had risen so far, so fast, that Law knew the numbers had detached from anything real. So instead of letting doubt speak, he tried to manage it by decree. He tried to command the market to trust him. The moment Law began forcing people to believe, he had already lost. Because trust is not something a government can legislate. Power can stamp a face into metal. Power can print a number onto paper. It cannot make a merchant in Lyon accept a note he has started to doubt. And once doubt enters a marketplace, it does not wait for permission to spread. He did not run early. He could have. But Law stayed, still convinced the system could be saved. He was not protecting a theft. He was trying to save a theory. But sincerity does not make a disaster innocent. That is the part I do not want to soften. A man can believe deeply in what he is doing and still become dangerous, especially when the thing he believes in has started needing other people's lives to keep proving him right. Some people do not destroy things because they are careless. They destroy them because they loved them too completely to stop. But the people who had to live inside the consequences of that love, they were never asked whether they wanted to be part of the proof. The collapse did not happen in one day. It happened in waves across most of 1720. As confidence fell, people rushed to convert their paper notes back into silver and gold. The bank could not accommodate them. The reserves had not been enough for some time. Law's carriage was attacked by a crowd. By December 1720, he was gone from France. He died in Venice in 1729, still writing, still refining the theory, still convinced, apparently, that the principle had been correct, even if the scale had been catastrophic. Jean-Baptiste was not ruined. He had bought late and sold not out of wisdom, but out of a nervousness he had never fully silenced. He came back to the coffee house, not to gloat. He came back to try to understand what had happened. And what he kept returning to was not the money. It was the moment he had signed. The feeling that had moved his hand. But he did not feel right. The numbers said he had survived. His body did not seem to believe them. France did recover from the Mississippi bubble, but trust did not recover in the same way. Once people learn that official confidence can stand on empty air, they do not simply forget it. They start asking the question that every bubble in every century works very hard to prevent. What is this actually worth? I do not think John Law's deepest failure was overissuing paper money. His deepest failure was this. He built a system that required people to keep believing in it, and when they stopped, he could not accept that their doubt was reasonable. He thought doubt was a malfunction, something to be corrected with persuasion, decrees, and more elegant arguments. He never understood that the moment you have to force confidence, you no longer have it. Jean-Baptiste never forgot that feeling. The moment he signed, he never quite forgave himself for how reasonable it had seemed, because that is the cruel part. The most expensive errors are rarely the ones that look stupid while we are making them. John Law's system died in 1720, but the thing he trusted did not die with him. The belief that a good enough story, told by credible enough people, backed by just enough truth, can hold reality in place a little longer than it should. So ask yourself carefully, what are you watching rise right now? And when you explain why it keeps rising, are you describing reality? Or are you describing your own need for the thing to keep being real? Because the market does not need you to be stupid. It only needs you to take your doubt personally. This is the golden thread. If this stayed with you, follow the golden thread. We are not studying old money. We are studying old mistakes. wearing new faces,